active in the visual art scene in the early to mid 90s, I met black artists. They were the new black artists, the post-black artists, it's like Steve McQueen and Isaac Julian and Glenn Ligon and these people who, are pretty prominent now, and Carol Walker and others. They're canonized artists, and they all uniformly complained that people could only see their work as the work of black people. They were inspired to become artists by white artists' work, because, that's the history. And, they cared more about their work, their art, as art, than about their identity category.
Yeah.
It's representational politics. Although they also realized that that's how they were being institutionally received, and it's how they were getting support, and it's how the critics, they were frustrated at the way the critics misrecognized and improperly evaluated their work, on those lines. But, they made the best of it.
All right, well, welcome to the Cutrone Zone again. With me today, as always, on Fridays, or every other Friday, is the last Marxist, everyone's favorite track coach, resident genius, and the coolest guy around, because he may have just jumped the shark, Chris Cutrone.
Hey.
Yeah, big week for you. You're a star. You've had your moment. You're getting your 15 minutes. Hopefully, you can extend it.
I hope it's not. I hope this isn't the 15 minutes of fame. Yeah, that would be weird.
Yeah,
to use a term.
Very typical, actually. It would be extremely typical for this to be your 15 minutes of fame, because it's such a. It's really anyway. I think the Greenland, Canada, Panama question is going to be news cycled away within a month. I mean, and maybe it will return, but that's not
possible.
It's not a major story, really, but it is. But your reaction to it is a major story. Your article in Compact is a major story, but it's not about Trump or Greenland,
right?
But really about the left. So
right.
Let's get into it. Let's talk about how why you wrote the article. What did you want to title it again?
Why Not Greenland?
Right.
Yeah. Why Not Greenland?
Yeah.
Which so it was solicited by the Compact editor Jeff Schellenberger, who then did promote it with that tagline, Why Not Greenland? So I don't know how the title was changed, but it was changed into something far more positive. It also ends on a more positive note, because not only was that the title, but that was the last line of my article originally. So why not Greenland? And I was trying to echo my most infamous article prior to this, which is Why Not Trump in 2016. Right. So, which again, there's the colloquial meaning of why not, which is let's do it. And then there's actually the literal meaning, which is why not, meaning the onus is on the argument against it. The onus is not on the argument for it. The onus is on the argument against it. And interestingly, I'm going to be interviewed by Jeff Schellenberger for Compact for their podcast.
And Ashley too, right? Ashley will be on there.
I think Ashley probably might be part of it. Yes, it's later in the day, so it's possible that it's too late for her, but we'll see. But interestingly, I don't know that they knew what I was going to write when they solicited the article. Meaning, people on the left who are paranoid and who hate my article might imagine that Compact called me up and said, "We want you to write an article endorsing Trump's move to annex Greenland," but they didn't. They just solicited an article from me on Greenland. So I could have written something that was very much opposed to the annexation of Greenland, and they would have run it. So then the issue is, did I help make up Compact's mind on the issue? Right? Which
maybe.
I think
maybe you did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to insert one factoid. In 2017, I think it was, I got on the roster for Sky News as a potential talking head.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do with these things is they just give you a subject and ask you to come on at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
So like I hadn't been following the Greenland story, but
Right.
they said we want you to come in and talk about Trump's proposal to buy Greenland. And so I spent like a morning looking
Researching.
into it, thinking about it, reading about it. And when I went on, I said a variety of kind of typical rad lib kinds of things, but I ultimately said, you know, it's not an independent nation. They rely on Denmark to continue. They don't
Right.
have an independent economy, and for the United States to buy it is well within the realm of the possible. There's the
Oh, right. That's
you know
right.
it's not barbaric or outside of the realm of the norm
It's not
for this
outrageous or
proposal.
crazy.
Right, for this proposal to be made. It's the way he made it was different and more rude maybe or frank or but it was not. So that was what I said in 2017, which is that it was hardly an insane proposition, really. Um, and so
And
that's
they
where
moved
we are
forward
at the
with
moment.
it,
Yeah.
meaning it remained on their policy agenda for the rest of the first term. It was never abandoned as a goal. So he's just resuscitating it now because he's coming back into office. So if he had been elected for a second term, then they would have continued to pursue it.
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly, you know, the why not argument, right? And maybe the why not argument is obvious, which is, perhaps domination by American capitalism will be worse than domination by EU capitalism. Maybe the US would be more aggressive, would have less environmental rules about mining,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, right? And so it might be worse for the people of Greenland. Now, one thing that has come to light for me since I wrote the article, so I mentioned that the Inuit arrived after the Vikings.
Mm-hmm.
And, many Inuit end up indigent in Denmark, end up
Mm-hmm.
drug addicts, homeless, poor people, can't support themselves in Greenland, so end up in Denmark. And so, I would say that to me says that the Inuit are suffering the fate of many Native American people, in
Mm-hmm.
Canada and the United States, who routinely have what they call, a low score on the Human Development Index in terms of like lifespan and, well-being, so they have, you know, a situation there in Greenland that's not great to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, what would buying Greenland amount to? I think that it would amount to the US being willing to subsidize Greenland at a higher rate than Denmark does.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to say something because I used the example of Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
So I went on my honeymoon to Iceland.
Hmm.
And, the first thing that I encountered when we got off the plane, me and Fazell,
Mm-hmm.
was a large contingent of American troops who outnumbered everyone else in the airport.
Hmm.
It's a small country, a small airport. It's like a small regional airport in the United States, but it was dominated by the presence of American military forces.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't expecting that, even though I guess I should have known,
Mm-hmm.
that Iceland exists as an independent nation for the purposes of the United States military.
Right.
And that might be where Greenland is going. Right. So people have fact checked me. Like the Justin Trudeau fact check is just silly because obviously it did prompt his ouster. The Trump statement about the
I
51st
I
state.
fact checked you
You
on that
did.
one.
That's right. And but the other one about the impulse to independence. Yes, there's been an independence movement in Greenland for quite some time. However, it certainly has gotten a renewed impetus by the Trump proposal.
Oh yeah, and look, my fact checking was half tongue in cheek, when I
Oh,
was
that was
going.
good. No, I
Yeah.
watched you and Ben Studebaker, and I thought you processed my article very well. So, but just, for those who haven't seen that,
Mhm.
I just want to say these are the things that people have taken issue with in my
Well,
article.
there's
Yeah.
something else that people are taking issue with on a kind of a deeper level. Derek Varn
Hmm.
did an hour just for his patrons, I guess, or
Oh, yeah, close reading of the article.
right. And he wrote to me and said, here's what he wrote. He said, listen, if imperialism is Bonapartism, is Marxism, as Spencer and Cutrone have been implying, while
Wait,
also
what about that
calling
last equivalence? That's strange. Go ahead.
but imperialism is Bonapartism, is Marxism, as Spencer and Cutrone have been implying, while also calling me a liar for saying Platts were pro-imperial. At a certain point, if no one gets the Platts secret doctrine, even in the group, there's something wrong. I wanted class independence, not just dingish, but instead of China, Trump. I don't know how to reconcile that with Trotsky, the Frankfurt School, and Lenin or Marx and Engels. That's
Yeah, so let me
what.
say something about this, right? So first of all, it's not an endorsement of what Trump is doing.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful about like our spectator role that we're used to on the left, where we can get very impassioned the way sports fans get
Mm-hmm.
riled up and really invest themselves psychologically in how their team does, whether it wins or loses, even though their own feelings have nothing to do with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we are not in a position to affect this policy by Trump. We can only observe from the sideline. Now, I do want to say something. I did have a moment. So, when I saw that Compact had made my article more positive than I
Mm-hmm.
intended it to be,
Mm-hmm.
um, and when it was, you know, noticed by others, like more mainstream Democratic Party type people like Jonathan Chait in The Atlantic,
Mm-hmm.
it did occur to me, and knowing that Don Jr. is going there, I gamed out all sorts of scenarios in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, all sorts of things can happen. Bad things can happen. And I certainly don't want to be a kind of Hearst publication, remember the Maine, like jingoism encouraging the Spanish American War.
Mm-hmm.
The famous clip from the movie,
Mm-hmm.
like, don't worry, I'll give you your war,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I did have this fear, like, what if Don Jr. lands on Trump Force One? And what
Mm-hmm.
if some Inuit or other activists take him hostage?
Hmm.
Then, of course, the US will invade, right?
Right.
And so all sorts of things can happen. I imagine blood on the tarmac. What if there's
Right.
a shootout? I mean, bad things can happen. And, I was transported back in my mind to the 1983 invasion of Grenada by the United
Mm-hmm.
States,
Mm-hmm.
which was a formative experience for me. In other words, I hated Reagan ever since then.
Mm-hmm.
Like it shocked me. And it had a lot to do, I mean, in fact, literally talking with a good friend of mine, his older sister was like, Chris, you should read the Communist Manifesto. And that's how I ended up reading Marx.
Mm-hmm.
Out of my outrage at the US invasion of Grenada. And I saw footage of it on PBS that had been smuggled out by a European journalist who basically had like shots of the American helicopters, coming in and rocketing, and I mean, it looked like Apocalypse Now. And
Right.
I was like, what? And so, look, my anti
Or like a scene from Red Dawn, only we're
right,
the
right,
right.
but exactly. But in any case, my anti-imperialist credentials are unimpeachable,
Right.
meaning I am, of course, against imperialism in both senses, right? But obviously in the colloquial sense, meaning most people, when they say imperialism, what they mean are imperialist policies. And of course, I oppose all imperialist policies, including wars and also other things like economic sanctions,
Mm-hmm.
which are just as destructive as shooting wars. So now,
Right.
of course, Marxism by imperialism doesn't mean the policy, it means the historical conditions. It means
Mm-hmm.
late stage capitalism. It means a reality that exists whether or not countries invade each other. So, from a Marxist perspective, Sweden and Denmark are imperialist countries, even
Mm-hmm.
though they don't do what the US does,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, Switzerland is an imperialist country.
Mm-hmm.
Canada is an imperialist country. And we'll get to
Mm-hmm.
Canada, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So, now, again, how that's understood, I mean, one of the things that Spencer and I have worked on over the years, it's something that I wrote in one of the founding documents for Platypus. I lifted a phrase from Marx, a very obscure phrase, parliamentary Bonapartism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a reference to the British government in the 19th century, meaning it would seem outrageous, and yet Marx said that Bismarck, Napoleon III, and the British government all had the same character.
Mm-hmm.
Namely, they're all imperialist. And that it was before Benjamin Disraeli declared Queen Victoria Empress of India. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
before sort of official like imperialism in that sense. Um, you know, so understanding that it's Bonapartism, that
Mm-hmm.
it's a external projection of a domestic situation. Or as J.P.
Right.
Nettle wrote about the republication of Rosa Luxemburg's The Accumulation of Capital, he
Mm-hmm.
wrote a review of it for the Cliffite journal in the UK in the early 60s. He said Rosa Luxemburg understood that imperialism was above all a domestic issue.
Mm-hmm.
And of course it is. Meaning, where does anti-imperialism really come from? It comes from, a kind of sentimental feeling about the abuses visited on other countries. But
Mm-hmm.
it's really at a more gut level, it's opposition to one's own state,
Mm-hmm.
one's own government, and not just its policies, but its character,
Right.
right? And so, but reminding people that a country can be imperialist without invading any other country.
Yeah, just to kind of hone in on that, just in the example of Greenland, what you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about is a dependency,
Mm-hmm.
Greenland, on the Kingdom of Denmark, and a negotiation between imperialist countries over who should shoulder the burden of that dependency,
Yeah.
right? And so, from the socialist perspective, the question would be, what would make organizing for our own political
Purposes.
party
Mm-hmm.
and political purposes easier? Would it be easier to organize if Greenland remains within the Kingdom of Denmark, or would it be easier to organize if those people had the same rights as a citizen of the United States?
Right.
Would be how I would think of it.
Yeah. I
And
mean, and that's
obviously, we're not really, Greenland is not going to be for us a
right.
particularly important
It's
piece of the
not.
puzzle, but nonetheless, it's worth thinking about just in the abstract because we can get lost. And
Oh yeah. I mean, look, we have to try to take the opportunities provided by anything that happens in capitalism.
Mhm.
And so it's not like it's a particularly auspicious organizing opportunity for American socialists for the US to acquire Greenland, which means that, I don't know, we can send some cadre up there to organize the miners,
Right.
right? I mean, that could happen, and certainly one would be obligated to do that.
Hmm.
But and we could say, maybe because we're trying to launch an initiative for a socialist movement in the United
Hmm.
States in a way that's not taking place in Europe, that perhaps it is better for Greenland to be in the American sphere rather than the European sphere.
Yeah.
There's nothing particularly stopping us from doing that now, right? So it's not like, you know, oh, this advances socialism or something, right? Again, I think that people, it's like a kind of a magical thinking. It's a
Mm-hmm.
psychology. It's, do we want this or not? And again, my question is, well, is there any particular reason why we shouldn't want it? It's kind of like Trump. Is there any particular reason why we especially should not want Trump to win the election as opposed to Kamala Harris or Joe Biden?
Right. I happen to feel, and maybe you can correct me if this is wrong, but I happen to feel that in the case of comparing the Biden-Harris administration to the Trump administration that had come before and what Trump was promising to be if he was reelected, that in fact we should prefer Trump.
Yeah, I
But
wrote about this in Why I Want Kamala to Win, which is to
mm-hmm,
say both sides are lying, and they're
mm-hmm,
lying in all sorts of ways, but let's keep it at the level of the promises they're making.
mm-hmm.
And so the question is, whose promises do I want to come true?
Right,
And there might be promises on both sides that I would want to come true. But the idea that Trump is just lying and there's no way we would want any of his promises to come true, I think that's just wrong.
right. Well, for me, one of the things the Democrats were promising was to eventually overturn and get rid of the First Amendment.
Ha!
So
Well, right. I mean, they
you
are
know,
doing that. Can I just say, because it's the news
yeah.
of the day,
Mm-hmm.
the Gaza ceasefire is obviously due to Trump. It's due to Trump's election. And, so the left that wanted this ceasefire
Mm-hmm.
should be happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, before we got on, was watching a interview on Fox News with John Kirby, who's the Pentagon spokesman, and he was beaming, bright, happy, and he was talking about how helpful that the incoming Trump team was in securing this. And of course, he's being careful not to give too much credit.
Mm-hmm.
They're still playing politics with it. But at the same time, what we can observe is that there's a bipartisan consensus. So what is that bipartisan consensus? It's no less imperialist, but
Mm-hmm.
it's actually not in favor of Netanyahu's policies or his government's
Right.
policies, meaning they want a two-state solution. The United States wants a two-state solution. So the left that says, oh, the US pretends to want a two-state solution
Mm-hmm.
as ideological cover for genocide. And of course, before October 7th, they were calling it genocide because it's
Mm-hmm.
ethnic cleansing, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, well, no, that's not true. So I think that I mentioned in our last show, I watched Zizek and Varoufakis says that Netanyahu keeps Hamas around in order to convince the US to give up on the two-state solution. And I pointed out that will never happen, meaning
Mm-hmm.
the US will never endorse the expulsion of Palestinians.
Right.
That's just simply, the US will never want that. Now, it might happen despite the US not wanting it, but the US does not want it. And
Well,
that's a bipartisan consensus. So it's not like a bipartisan consensus in favor of like rabid Zionism and the expulsion of Palestinians. No, there's a bipartisan consensus that's critical of Israel, that's for a two-state solution.
I recently read a piece in Tablet, and I
Now,
wish I
whether
could
that's
remember
good or not is something else. But
Right.
go ahead.
Right. Well, I just recently read an article in Tablet. I wish I could remember the name of the author and the title of the piece, but you know how things go. But the after reading it, it occurred to me that what was setting up a resolution to the conflict were two things. One, the way in which Israel had been let off its leash. Netanyahu had been let off its leash after the debate that Biden had, and the poor performance that he had, and the fact that he was probably going to be, and the fact that he was forced out. There was sort of like eyes were off Israel, that whatever
Yeah,
system,
Netanyahu took advantage of that opportunity.
right? Which then allowed Israel to kill a bunch of the top tier
Leadership,
Hamas leadership, and then
which the
that
U.S. had
plus
told them not to do.
right,
That might be a
right,
difference between Trump and Biden.
right. So and then yeah, I think it is, and then also the fact that Trump was coming in and he was more bellicose and more draconian and more willing to appear to be anti-Palestinian than Biden had been. So he
I mean,
was.
there was ambiguous rhetoric, right? So he said things like Chuck Schumer is being a Palestinian, but a bad Palestinian because a weak Palestinian.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Very ambiguous. He also promised Arab American audience in Michigan
Mm-hmm.
that he was going to end the war to stop the suffering of the people of
Yeah,
Gaza.
no, I totally believe he
Right?
believes in
Right.
a kind of old Reagan era doctrine of peace through strength, so and maybe in this moment it has at least temporarily
Putin has announced
worked.
the futility of Netanyahu's efforts, meaning he has said recently in the last day or so that the conditions now under which the ceasefire is to take place, that Hamas has replaced all the fighters it lost.
Yeah.
Right? And so why does he say that? He doesn't say that we should keep the war going. No, it's
Mm-hmm.
critical of Netanyahu and Israeli action.
Right.
So, I think that it's very clear. Now, one of the things that Trump did recently that was a signal
Mm-hmm.
before this ceasefire was, brought across the finish line in terms of the negotiating process, he reposted a speech by Jeffrey Sachs that talked about how Netanyahu is undue influence in American politics. Trump posted that. That was a
Yeah.
signal, meaning
Mm-hmm.
if Netanyahu, if you don't do what we want, this is the way I'm going to go. I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
talk about how you have undue influence in American politics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right?
No, that's the other piece was that Trump was more willing to twist
Yeah.
Netanyahu's arm than the Biden administration
And he
had
has
been.
clearly stated that he felt betrayed by Netanyahu, that during his efforts at bringing about a peace settlement with Israel and Palestine, that he felt that Abbas was more sincere and Netanyahu was playing him, and he felt betrayed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he has said that after the October 7th attack, during this
Yep.
current Gaza war, he said that. So
Mm-hmm.
he said it back then, but he also said it again. He reiterated.
And that's smart politics because Netanyahu's days are numbered.
There's that. I mean, not that maybe he will be replaced by someone worse.
That's true.
Right? And so and also what we talked about last time, Hamas could be replaced by somebody worse. Now,
That's
it is
true.
the case that I think the Biden administration and the incoming Trump team are trying to get the Palestinian Authority to have the upper hand in Gaza now.
Yeah.
Right. So Hamas will not be eliminated. That was never the point. The point was to destroy their military capacity, which has many dimensions. So maybe the number of fighters doesn't matter that much.
No, I would think the weakening Iran, hell,
Hezbollah.
weirdly, maybe the war with Russia helps weaken Hamas.
It does. Of course it
Yeah.
does. Of course.
So I mean, yeah, but just you don't think about it that way. But yeah, so I want to get back to Greenland though,
Sure.
because there's this idea of the Empire of Liberty rhetoric in your piece that comes from Jefferson, but it also many people hear that and they just think, oh, you're embracing neoconservatism. The notion that we're going to spread liberty around the world that was used by the Bush administration. It's been used
No,
again and
the
again and
U.S.
again.
is the Empire of Liberty, meaning
Right.
not U.S. abroad. The United States itself is the Empire of Liberty in Jefferson's language.
The free people of the United States.
Absolutely. And
Right.
so it's the Empire of Liberty, and the term empire is just a very neutral term in Jefferson's usage. It just means the domain. It just means the rule of liberty. It doesn't mean the empire, meaning the conquest of other countries. It has nothing to do with it.
All right. So, given that the possibility of confusion was so obvious, why not say that in your piece?
Well, because anybody can Google Empire of Liberty, right? I mean, look, I do write in such a way, and they told me 1,000 words, and I exceeded 1,000 words, but I also know Compact cuts me.
Yeah, right.
They do, and they heavily edit and they cut. And so I was like, okay, I got to keep it pithy, keep it tight, and really not allow much room for them to mess with this one.
Right.
Because I do write very carefully, so that I can stand by everything that I write. And then so that's why I don't like people changing my words, because then I feel like I can't stand by it. Right. And, ultimately they wanted a quick turnaround. I let it go. There are a couple of things that I would have wanted to retain. Like there was an X-Files reference that I wanted to retain for the humor. There was a Monroe Doctrine sentence that I wanted to retain that they inexplicably cut. And we've already discussed the title and the last line being taken out.
Right. When I wrote about the labor movement, I wrote a 1,600 word piece, and it ended up being 1,000 words in the end. And there were some parts of it that I missed.
Yeah, of course, because it's a constellation. I write in such a way all the parts, even when they seem completely unrelated, actually do ultimately refer back to each other. So, for instance, I talk about Trump's folly, and that's what Alaska was called, Seward's folly. And so they didn't change the word folly, thank God, because I do write poetically, meaning it's supposed to resonate across. It's not supposed to be just logical propositional statements. It's supposed to be a whole piece and an essay. So I was, but I do also, I should say, in the era of Platypus, because it bears on my writings in, the books that Sublation has published. I have been writing in the era of the internet. And what that means is, unless I want to direct people at other writings by other authors in particular, which I do in footnotes and that kind of thing, that I assume that facts and references and history can be Googled. And not that I'm happy with the Wikipedia version of things, but generally it's okay. Meaning, like, the Empire of Liberty can be explained as not what we think of as 20th century imperialism, post Spanish American War US imperialism.
Right.
And also not the same as the Mexican American War either, 1848, which, Marx and Engels endorsed the US victory of the Mexican American War, but we would have reason to object to that on the basis of pure liberalism, namely Ulysses S. Grant, who served in the war, thought it was regrettable that the US conquered Mexico. Right? So this is just not what's meant by the Empire of Liberty.
When I was talking to Arturo de Simon yesterday about it was supposed to be about Syria. I wasn't that interested in talking about Syria. I got more interested in his response to you on Jean Bajolan's Facebook wall, and we talk about that. But he asked me if we would, they said Marx endorsed the U.S. invasion of Mexico. Would you today endorse it? And I just gave a sort of, pat answer. I said, well, Marx might have endorsed it in that era, given the reality of the international socialist movement existing, and today we would have a
there are reasons to look at it very differently. And but again, we have to even in a sense forgive Marx and Engels, because of course they had nothing to do with the US in its war with Mexico. All that they could say is what good might come of it. Right. In other words, why should this land not be taken away from the lazy Mexicans and given to the industrious Americans?
Right.
And I mean, frankly, that's true. Back then, meaning, Spanish colonialism is not really historically progressive in the way that the English colonialism was, at least in part. Meaning the northern North American colonies, as opposed to the plantation colonies, did end up being in the forefront of bourgeois development in terms of the world. Adam Smith talked about this. It was the most democratic, the most free civil social community. It was the most productive and the most per capita wealthy. More than Britain itself.
Right.
And Adam Smith simply said, the capital of England might well move to New York.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which of course it did,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, now Arturo, what is his nationality?
A Reuben.
Oh, Caribbean. Okay. So I
Yeah,
was
but
going
he
to
but he
say
lives in Argentina now. But
Argentina. Okay, so let's talk about that for a second because, I know that this is the other thing. Oh, how would the US go to war with a NATO ally?
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, the US invaded Grenada.
Right.
Grenada was a Commonwealth country and associated with a NATO ally, the UK, and the UK objected very strongly, opposed the US invasion of Grenada.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, Argentina invaded the Falklands,
Yeah, we talked about the Falklands
and the
conflict.
UK, conducted a war to, return the Falklands to their control,
Mm-hmm.
and Reagan was not particularly supportive.
Yeah,
He didn't
wasn't
help
he?
them.
He didn't. No, we didn't send troops or anything. I don't
No,
think
he didn't.
we.
He didn't oppose it the way Thatcher opposed the U.S. invasion of Grenada,
Right.
but they also stood aside from it.
Right.
Meaning it might have been wrong for the dictatorship in Argentina to invade the Falklands, but it might
Mm-hmm.
have also been a mistake for Thatcher to have launched a war to get them back.
Well, there was an anti-war movement in the UK around the Falkland
Of
War,
course.
and there
And there was
they weren't.
opposition to the Argentinian invasion of the Falklands
Oh,
in
of course.
Argentina by
Yes,
the left in
right,
Argentina.
right. Yes, and Arturo expressed
That's
that
right.
sentiment, right? I mean,
And that's
and
what
so
we would be interested in. We'd be interested in the anti-war sentiment in Argentina and the UK.
right, because what is that? Where does that come from? It comes from the fact that for working class people, going to war with one another is not in their
Bad,
interest.
bad. And war
Yeah,
generally is bad and militarism is bad for very simple reasons. It strengthens the state.
yeah. So
It's
in both
it's
cases, but I
yep.
mean, But but for the people of Falklands, it's probably better that they did not remain within the realm of Argentinian rule
The junta
at that time.
in power.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I think, again, it's one of these things where whatever might have happened. I mean, look,
But on the other hand, there
yeah,
were options available to Thatcher other than military intervention.
there were perhaps, there might have been
They also
diplomatic
had like
pressure.
secret deals ahead of time. There was
Oh, of
already
course,
negotiations about
of
maybe
course,
turning the Falkland
over
Islands
to
over.
Argentina anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So
But the thing is, so why did it come down to a fight? And again, looking at it more domestically. And so one of the ways that so you mentioned Derek Varn.
mhm.
Um, so he thought that it was the Greenland proposal was meant to distract from the H-1B controversy among the Trumpists. And I just thought, no. Now, is this policy proposal aimed primarily at a domestic political audience by Trump? Yes. But in what way? Right?
Mhm.
It's not to crack the whip and to get all the Republicans in line behind him so they're not squabbling over the H-1B visa stuff, which he settled. He settled it, right? He's
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
favor of keeping the H-1B visa program, and
Mhm.
the crazy nativists are just have to eat it.
Mhm.
So he didn't
I
need to
know one of
distract.
them, and one of them is giving up politics altogether. He says
As
out
a
of such
result, now this is the thing:
disappointment.
people are hysteric. They just are overinvested in this stuff in the wrong ways, and they just care too much. They have no capacity for sobriety
Mhm.
and for looking at reality. Um, you know, I just think again, we're not in a position to change these things. We are in a position to think about them. And for me, this is so, this is our first conversation about this article. And I'll
Mhm.
just say, how did I approach writing it? I approached it very simply. Okay, the US wants to take over Greenland. And Trump has made these other statements regarding Canada and the Panama Canal. Now, you and I have the generational experience of George Herbert Walker Bush invading Panama.
Right, which I absolutely oppose.
Of course. Right?
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, that doesn't mean that a notorious international drug lord like Noriega was not going to get his comeuppance one way or another. Right? But I do remember the brutality of that invasion very vividly. And, and so, of course, I opposed it without thinking that Noriega stood for some kind of Latin American defiance of Yankee imperialism.
Right. Which maybe somebody did on the left.
Oh, no, a lot of people on the left did. Oh, yes, they absolutely did. So now, leaving aside Panama Canal, let's talk about Greenland and Canada. So basically, I decided, I just wrote it. I know what I think, so I just, boom. And by the way, to our listeners, children, famous statement about Lenin in 1917. Why did he win? Because he's the only one who knew his own mind. I'm the only one who knows my own mind on the left. So I'm going to win.
I object. I am on the left, and I believe I know my own mind.
Doug, do you? No, you might. But you know what I mean? Like, meaning I've got a plan.
Okay, I don't necessarily have a fully worked out plan.
I have a strategy.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I was able to, just write it. So what did I adopt as my framework? My framework was a basic propositional structure, not addressed necessarily as such, but what is the US? What is Greenland? What is Canada? Why do these things exist?
Yeah.
Why does the United States exist? Right? It exists because there was an American Revolution. And it exists because of the Civil War. So
I mean, that's such an important question to put at this moment, because people forget. They just sort of, like, how long has Canada even been sovereign? Like, within our lifetimes, right? I mean,
and its head of state is King Charles.
Right.
That's real.
So still, I know, right? It's still not entirely its own.
No, it's not. And it doesn't have a finalized constitution. It has a provisional constitution. And, the way a lot of things in Europe are provisional, like the EU is basically provisional in many respects. So the United States exists because of revolution, and Canada exists because of counter-revolution.
Yeah.
And Greenland exists because of deep European history from before the bourgeois era, the Vikings. But why does it exist now? Because it made sense to allow Denmark to administer it after World War II as a NATO ally.
Right.
As opposed to Iceland, where there was more of an urgency of getting its independence during World War II. And that was also true of Greenland. So, they both were taken out of Nazi Denmark hands. People don't understand that the fascists controlled all of Europe, except for the UK. And that meant that they also controlled the European colonies. So I teach Frantz Fanon. I'm going to be teaching Frantz Fanon next week. And he had to escape from Vichy-controlled Martinique during World War II to go fight in the French resistance. They sent a pro-Nazi Vichy guy, Admiral Robert, to rule Martinique. Right? So, so we shouldn't forget that the colonies of the European powers were under fascist control. And the US and the UK liberated.
Right.
The the Arctic possessions of Denmark.
And Russia liberated.
Russia, of course. I mean, look, obviously, and I bring that up in my article. So there's so much in my article that people leave out in their consideration. I talk about how the Soviet Union and the United States were allies. And that in FDR's view, and also in Stalin's view, that alliance was meant to be enduring and was meant to be mutually beneficial, also by way of keeping each other honest.
Right.
And that is certainly the view that the Chinese Communist Party had of the alliance with the United States in the late Cold War, when they agreed with Nixon and Kissinger in an anti-Soviet pact. And, what people don't understand, they forget, is that Mao's China, but also after Mao, they were active military allies of the United States and its allies in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. That's true in Afghanistan. That's true in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
China and the United States were allied with South Africa in the civil wars in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Mm-hmm. So why did they do that? They were fighting Soviet imperialism.
Right.
But the long-term prospects, meaning it was meant to win the Cold War, and it did. Mm-hmm. But after the Cold War, what is the point of this history of U.S.-China cooperation? Because in the 80s is when the U.S. started to really economically fuse with China in the way that it is now.
Mm-hmm.
Not just after 1989, but already before then.
Yeah.
And then the goal on both sides was, we're going to keep each other honest. That's the Chinese Communist Party perspective. They're like, the US is the global hegemon. How do we keep them from going off the chain? We make them economically dependent on us.
Right.
And from the US perspective, how do they keep China from going off the chain? By keeping them economically dependent on the US.
Right.
Right? Unfortunately, it's not working out. So why is it not working out? Because of the Great Recession and COVID.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, I would say the 2008 recession more than COVID, but yeah.
It brought about a new, Xi,
mm-hmm.
Like a new potential crisis and how to resolve that in China.
Mm-hmm.
And, COVID, lab leak theory aside, COVID is a blow to the global economy that does affect China. And so China weathered the Great Recession pretty well. They're weathering the post-COVID global economy less well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, I didn't want to make much of this at the time of the COVID pandemic, that it was an economic shock that would bring about the end of capitalism, because, of course, no. Right? This is what people imagined. They thought everyone would be kept at home and given government paychecks, and that would be the transition to socialism. It would be like how bourgeois society came out of feudalism due to the plagues.
Yeah, I said that. I argued that position.
You did not. Times. Oh, see what I mean, Doug? Do you know your own mind?
I know my own mind. I know what I argue. I don't know if it's right.
But right.
Well, but look, I didn't. To be fair to myself, I did not say I absolutely believe this, but I did say if this is the case and this is the case, and then why wouldn't this be the case? But
yeah, but it didn't turn out to be a plague of those dimensions, but it was damaging enough. But really, it exposed the underlying economic weakness of the global system.
Right. Well, Fabio Vighi argued the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And argues the opposite, that in fact it was used opportunistically to help entrench.
Well, of course capital. That's true. Of course that's true, because they do that with everything. In other words, the capitalists are going to do that with anything. I have a Ukraine article.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the Death of the Millennial Left, published by Sublation, and I just say, look, the capitalists benefit from everything. Meaning, it's not like capitalist profiteering is the cause of war. Most of the time it isn't, because usually wars are more costly than they are beneficial economically net. However, there are capitalists who benefit, always. Right? Mm-hmm. And so we should, if we think of, is this happening because it benefits capitalism? Well, capitalism benefits from everything. And it's not a conspiracy. It's just the way it is. Meaning the destruction that takes place within capitalism or takes place exogenously still becomes part of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And is an opportunity for it. So, it's like, so we don't have to ascribe like very deliberate intentional motives, although clearly people did intentionally, take advantage. And, I always like to say it's the greatest upward redistribution of resources to the upper class that has ever taken place in world history, the COVID crisis.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Even more than the 2008 economic
2008.
crisis.
Yes. So the
Because that
2008 was
at that
already
point, the
already.
biggest. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, I guess because of the way in which the COVID crisis was not so explicitly about the economy.
A lot was
Some
hidden.
of yeah.
You know how it took place? It took place in the destruction of small businesses.
Right.
That's how it took
Right.
place. So in other words, the big capital cannibalized small capital. That's
Right.
how it happened.
Which you couldn't help but note at the time was going to happen and was happening. And you just sort of crossed your fingers for the working class that the big capital would cannibalize it all. Right?
Right. So when we say this, we're not saying necessarily at the expense of the working class.
Right.
But nonetheless, it's still a remarkable thing. And again, it begs the question of, what do we mean when we're opposing capitalism? What do we mean when we're opposing imperialism? So I've had this on my mind a lot. Like the Anti-Imperialist League in the United States around the Spanish-American War is, associated with the populist movement. And it's liberal. It's liberal, it's democratic. It opposes imperialism as strengthening the state and strengthening monopoly capital and strengthening finance capital. It's opposed to all of that. It's very clearly articulated in the populist movement and in the anti-imperialist league of the time. It's part of the critique of the Gilded Age, the anti-imperialism of the time. But that is not the socialist opposition to imperialism, or that's not the socialist perspective on imperialism. At least from a Marxist perspective. That would be a petty bourgeois socialist at best. It's not even really socialist. But the Marxist perspective is, as Lenin put it, in and through imperialism. Meaning, not about trying to turn back the clock. It's not. So I was thinking about it in terms of, I mentioned Theodore Roosevelt and I mentioned Woodrow Wilson. And these are loaded references. Meaning, the creators of the administrative state, but also the reformers, the progressives. And there is a difference between Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson with respect to this. And you still see it in the Democratic Party today. The Wilsonian legacy, which is that, and also in the Republican Party. Like, we can't get blinded by neoliberalism and privatization and all of that. You can see it to this day. The Democrats want to break up monopolies, and the Republicans want to regulate them. Right. Keep them, but regulate them. Meaning, keep the advantage of capital consolidation, but try to temper the bad effects.
Right.
Whereas the Democrats always have this kind of cockamamie idea of, we just turn back the clock. Meaning, you break up big capital, and that's how you fix it. And that's not the Marxist perspective. That's not Lenin's perspective at all. It was not Eugene Debs' perspective. So there's a wonderful article by Eugene Debs that I always like to make reference to that's about this imperialism issue. It's Competition versus Cooperation. It's from 1900. And he says socialists are opposed to imperialism, but for different reasons from the Democrats. And at that time, it was William Jennings Bryan, who had been a populist, and he's running as the candidate.
And who was a very destructive figure, I think, to the socialist movement.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. Yeah. So, Pache or Contra Thomas Frank, again, populism, progressivism, socialism are not the same thing. And the degree to which populism fed into a certain version of progressivism, it's very distinct and opposed to socialism from a Marxist perspective. And so, again, what Debs said is, we don't oppose imperialism for the same reasons as the Democrats, because the Democrats are against it because they're against big capital. Right? So they just want to restore the tyranny of small capital as opposed to the tyranny of big capital, whereas Marxists want to transform big capital into socialism.
Right. This is the difficult part, okay? And I'm going to bring up Bonapartism now.
Okay.
Because well, from my perspective, in this moment, When I think of big capital and monopolies, I think of big tech and the amount of capital concentration there's been in the realm of
Here's
media.
another news flash: Elon Musk buying TikTok.
Did that happen?
No, but it's being floated.
Yeah, I heard that it was floated. But okay.
Because Trump would prefer not to ban TikTok, but put it under U.S. ownership. And so
yeah, look,
Musk is there.
If Musk has, and from my perspective, if Musk buys TikTok or not, the real damage has been done by giving the U.S. The power to ban this media company on these grounds.
But they do have these powers. Like, it's remarkable, right? The Nippon Steel proposal to buy U.S. steel was blocked by Biden. I mean, the U.S. president has a great deal of power.
Right.
A great deal of power, and that's not going to go away. And
yeah, but when it comes,
but
when it comes to steel, okay, but when it comes to media companies,
wait, what is this? Critical infrastructure, Doug? Right? I mean, can you say that, U.S. steel is more important for, as a strategic asset than TikTok is? I mean, if you listen to the Republicans,
I don't care about that. Though,
China's invading the U.S. through TikTok.
Yeah,
it's planting malware and everything through TikTok.
Well, you got to get rid of the malware
in your refrigerator via TikTok.
They're not concerned about the malware in our refrigerator. They're concerned about the malware in our heads. Okay.
Yeah, no,
and we have the right to receive information. We have the right to Chinese propaganda, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, well, that's certainly true. Now, if only the Chinese were trying to propagandize the United States. I think that one of the criticisms we might make of the Chinese Communist Party is that they don't really try to propagandize the United States.
No.
Right? Because it would be, I think it would be too much of a challenge to them, actually. In other words, I think they'd have a hard time. It's like the Russians have a hard time. Remember the ads that the Russians placed on Facebook in 2016?
Yeah,
and it's like, crazy. how could anyone imagine that this would work?
Right. But we have the right to whatever they try to tell us, because we have the right to hear from whoever we want to.
Right.
And the idea that the state should decide which media companies should be allowed.
But why they want to ban TikTok. They don't want to ban it for Chinese propaganda. They want to ban it for Chinese data mining on American citizens. And that might be a good enough reason. Meaning, I don't want anybody data mining. I don't want any state data mining.
Right. Okay. Yes. But that's just, again, you want to address the data mining. This arose in the context of the war on disinformation and was justified.
Of course it folds into that. Of course it does. That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, ironically enough, right? Because it's not like TikTok was going to promote the lab leak theory. Like, it's like, choose your disinformation that you're worried about.
Right. But again, just to go back to the monopoly capital problem, which is that the more concentration media companies have as big capital, the more integrated they become.
I don't know about you, but I only want one social media platform. I don't want X and Facebook and YouTube and this and that. Like, if I could just go to one, that would be fine.
I'd rather there be more than one, because I'd rather there be more than one newspaper. I'd rather there be more than one social media company.
Right. Well, social media companies, whether they are newspapers, that's the thing. In other words, I'd love there to be one social media company that has no editorial control whatsoever.
But that just isn't going to happen.
No, I know. But you know what I mean,
not
right?
just because, I mean, with net
it's
neutrality,
like, we have to go to Rumble now, or we have to do something else, right? Or we have to go to Blue Sky or whatever it's called, And it's just like, you know what? No.
I understand, but Musk has exposed the fact, and we kind of already should have known, that nothing is actually on a level playing field on any of these platforms. The algorithms decide.
So what do you think about Zuckerberg?
I think that it is good.
I'm very happy because they banned one of my repostings of This Is Revolution video of Gene and Varn saying Chris isn't so bad and he was one of the nicest people that they've ever met.
And they banned that because they're against
Facebook
you.
banned it because I'm sure that the fact checkers are some fucking Maoists, like at Wikipedia. But you know, in other
You
words,
don't
you let
know.
these
I mean,
Democrats in, and you get flooded with Maoists.
the algorithms don't really work either to
They
ban
don't work.
correctly.
They also banned one of my Lego Star Wars posts for
Yeah,
copyright
right.
infringement, and it's like,
Yeah.
what?
You know what? You just have haters
Right.
who will go after, who will report you,
Right.
and then you get banned, and that might not go away.
And the Lego Star Wars post being taken down hurt me more than the demon born saying that I'm a nice person.
Yeah, but the
because I lost those photos.
The point I'm trying to make about the big capital and that Zuckerberg, like, I think you have to hope for. I mean, Elon Musk exposed this. X or Twitter is not a neutral free speech zone, but it is a countervailing social media company to everything else, which was being controlled by the Democratic Party's administrative state. So we should be happy there's more than one version.
No, of course. But I'm just, in terms of break up the monopolies, it's like, well, that may or may not solve the problem. Right? Like, what is it? Well, it's the oligopoly problem too. Right?
Right. Well, I'm just asking you, like,
and the
if we
wanted
if we wanted socialists to transform big capital into socialism, one of the problems we'd run up against is how big capital is going to ban the Chris Cutrone posts and suppress the voice of socialists automatically now.
Yeah, it could be done automatically. I mean, again, we have to get smart about how we communicate in such a way as to be able to evade those things. I think that that's possible, at least to a certain extent. But then there's a kind of, struck by lightning, act of God quality to the way the algorithms function. And, but again, like, so of course people are going to think how absurd Chris Cutrone is by bringing up Eugene Debs in 1900, and it's like, yeah, of course, Debs thought that the dictatorship of the proletariat, which he wanted, would be achieved in his lifetime or shortly thereafter. And, he endorsed the Russian Revolution. He said, from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet, I'm a Bolshevik through and through, in response to the murder of Rosa Luxemburg.
Right.
So he said, I'm with them. And they were killed for being Bolsheviks, and I'm a Bolshevik. Right? So it's like, obviously that didn't come to pass. However, it does tell us something about how we might think about these things. Meaning, look, people are very upset with my article at one basic level, which is that I don't tell them what should be done.
Well, they read you as saying what you need to do is back Trump.
Right.
That's how they read you.
Yeah, and that's just the Manichaeanism and the authoritarian psychology of black and white thinking and either or thinking. But, when they go back, like Derek did, and read it closely, then they're like, oh, actually, Cutrone is not endorsing Trump, right? Because I wasn't. And, but they think it's got to be one or the other. And so the issue is, because I'm not opposing whatever Trump does, then I must be supporting it. And rather, of course, it's like, no, let's think about this. Let's think about what this is about, what it amounts to, where it comes from historically. That's why I began with the image that I did. And, there's deep history, there's recent history, like I said, there's X-Files history, like Camp Century, which is from the 50s, and given up in the 60s. But, it does have, like, it's very, like, I don't know, Ice Station Zero. It's got some kind of, like, timeless post-war, Cold War, it could be in the 80s, They might have even, like, made some Cold War movies in the 50s that they remade in the 80s. I think that they did. And then the relic of this, so the 90s was all about the relic, right? It was all about, like, post-Soviet Russia being, like, a place for the conspiracy and the X-Files, the Black Oil conspiracy, The people who are going to run the world were going to be now instead of the Soviets and the Americans, it was going to be the kleptocrat Russians and the Americans in a conspiracy against the people with the aliens, right? um, so it's just quaint. And again, it's an opportunity to think. And now, did I underestimate the knee-jerk reflexes? Of course I did, because I always do, because I imagine that there are human beings out there, not these twitchy insects.
Yeah.
Meaning I expect the mammalian brain, not the reptilian brain, to be operating when people read. I guess that's my foolish mistake that I make again and again.
Well, I mean, look, you do have to ask yourself at a certain level how conscious are your critics of being Democratic Party operatives? I mean, at what point can we assume that they don't know their own mind? And I want to defend myself again about this. When I made the argument that this could lead to the transformation of capitalism into something else, I was not saying it definitely would. I was just saying I'd like to hear why this is wrong. And I think I even posited it to you at one point, and you were just like, no. But
well, because it's neither here nor there. In other words, we have to struggle for socialism, meaning capitalism is not going to be transformed into socialism on its own. It's only going to happen. I mean, the Marxist perspective, the original Marxist perspective, which a lot of so-called Marxists have forgotten, it has to be a conscious act. It's not like bourgeois society, which is not to say bourgeois society wasn't through a series of conscious acts too, but largely it happened organically, spontaneously, and people only really became conscious of it such that they could consciously advocate for it late, after it had already happened.
Yeah, the owl of Minerva flies at dusk.
Flies at dusk, right. And, unfortunately, the struggle for socialism is not like that. We're not going to wake up one day and magically things will be socialist. No.
But we are still stuck with bourgeois consciousness. We are not,
right.
We still mostly can only really fully recognize
conceive
what's
of
happened after the fact.
After the fact, absolutely. And, and project a kind of bourgeois future, capitalist future. So here's my other point. So, I mentioned, because I know that this is the other thing that raises people's hackles. So what is the U.S.? The U.S. is the product of the revolution. However, of course I know that capitalism contradicts it.
Right.
Meaning capitalism both is and is not the legacy of the revolution. And in a very important way, capitalism, unbeknownst to anyone and unintended by anyone, does contradict bourgeois freedom.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing.
But that's like, who would argue against that?
Right? Wait, they would, Doug, because people think capitalism is the market.
Yeah.
Right? They think it's commodity production. They think it's the market. They think this is the ruthless logic of the market that leads to capital accumulation. And it's like, well, no, right? And again, I think that Derek also takes this up, sometimes, where, the Hegelian notion of necessity and freedom, and also necessity and contingency, meaning contingent things happen that then become necessary once they've happened. And so was the Industrial Revolution contingent, or was it like a logical necessity? Well, it's both and neither of those things, because Marx thought that the Industrial Revolution happened because of the class struggle of the workers that went on under bourgeois consciousness, meaning the working class asserting its bourgeois right, impelled the capitalists to replace workers with machines.
Yeah, I always thought it was both the class struggle of the workers to get like the 40-hour work week and
it's logical in that sense, meaning that
but it was also the need for capitalists to compete.
Yes, of course,
in the market, and look, when this I think this is a difference between my thinking and yours, and I know my own mind well enough to know that I'm not always right. So I I just want to raise this. There's a way in which industrial capitalism was born out of commodity production, meaning
Sure.
labor, the freedom of labor,
Yes.
being the terms by which all society was formed.
Reproducing itself, right?
Yeah. And so then, the drive towards efficiency, towards mass production, towards
what it comes down to? I think we had a private correspondence about this, so I'll just talk about it because you were talking about it with Reed,
Mhm.
and about political economy. And what it comes down to is, the phrase of Marx. So machines are supposed to be a labor-saving device, but
Right.
somehow it never works out to be so.
Right.
Right? And so why is that? Well, because Adam Smith imagined that the development of bourgeois social relations would maximize production and minimize labor.
Right.
And that has happened, except with the perverse consequence that it produced unemployment and a new form of misery, which of course Adam Smith did not imagine. Adam Smith imagined that everyone will work and everyone will work less and produce more. He didn't think some people will be doing sweatshop labor and other people will be doing no labor because they'll be replaced by machines. Because that's really been the result of the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
It's produced both more intense labor and unemployment at the same time.
Right. And there's a quote from Abraham Lincoln about how he expects wage labor to be a phase in life.
Exactly.
Which, and so
it's very Jeffersonian.
Right. And so the question becomes, how do we overcome a petty bourgeois, small capitalist mentality where we imagine that every worker can be their own entrepreneur and all we need to do is clear away big capital and crony capital.
I mean, look, there are some high-paid workers, who work in, there are factory workers who retire early on savings and live comfortably.
Right, but there are also a lot of people who might start out in an industry, say house painting. They start out as a house painter, and they learn the skills, they make connections, and then they start their own business. And they hire young guys to come in to work as house painters.
Yeah, that would be the classic petty bourgeois. And also, that would be the Adam Smith version. So, why is it the Industrial Revolution? And how is the Industrial Revolution not just a logical outcome of commodity production? Well, because actually, a logical outcome of commodity production doesn't explain how the workers were expropriated from the means of production. So let's not forget that. When the workers owned their tools and the skills that they embodied were real possessions that mattered, that it was real social capital to not only own the tools, but know how to use them. Because, of course, that's more important, knowing how to use them. And so the replacement of skilled labor and tools by machines is not a logic of commodity production. It is something else. Meaning, when did the machine go from being a tool to being a replacement for the worker? Because, of course, it's both. It's both, right? It's not one or the other, it's both. And this is why I brought up the Hegelian dialectical logic.
Well, but I would say that the fact that what allows commodities to exchange in the market is the way in which they embody the labor time spent on it, and that if you're running your own house painting business, if you can get a robot to do the work, in
the circuit of capital, we have to remember that at every step of the way, from Marx's perspective, there's a contradiction. Meaning, it's not just a circuit of capital in the sense of, oh, this is how it happens. How it happens is how it's contradicting itself all the time, and not in a productive dialectical way, but in a destructive way. In other words, again, market competition is not what we're talking about. We're not talking about winners and losers on the market. We're not talking about people having to change jobs. That's not what we're talking about, right? And that's the way everyone will see it. by the way. That's the way the Democrats see it. That's the way the Republicans see it. They see it through bourgeois ideology.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the left responds in kind. In other words, the Democrats and the Republicans see it as, oh, well, things change. There are new inventions, new technology, you know, the market, you know, there are winners and losers. And then the left is like, yeah, that is what it is, and I'm against that. And it's like, wait, you can't, no, it's not that. Right? In other words, you can't.
Well, I don't feel like that's exactly what I was pointing to just a moment ago. I wasn't pointing to the competition alone, but also the way in which that competition is in contradiction to itself, because for one person to, you know, innovate and win out, what that will do is it will change the entire industry, which will mean that the amount of laborers needed will decline, and the amount of value that's held within the, you know,
when you did this vert critique discussion with Reed, and you showed the clip from a platypus panel,
mm-hmm.
I just thought this clip is so damning of vert critique, because it just shows how it's pure mystification.
Okay, well, explain what. Why didn't I see this? See, maybe I don't. I don't know everything. I did not think that it was particularly mystifying when I showed it, but I didn't also think that he had fully explicated his justification.
You know, just the way Alan Milchman like began.
Mm-hmm.
You know, which is, I may not understand and I may not explain myself properly. Like it was some kind of like weird religious catechism.
Oh.
You know, just the way he began, which is like, okay, I have something to say, but you know what? I'm not sure I understand what I'm saying, and I'm not sure that I'm saying it properly either, even if I did understand it. And I just thought, this is what vert critique is, meaning it's like value, value, you know? And it's like, you know, so that's a little bit of what I heard you just say, which is like the value, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's why I said the circuit of capital. For Marx, the transformations of value are not just that, they're the self-contradictions of value at every step. So it's unzipping. Like, in other words, it isn't like flowing, it's also disintegrating. Right? And, you know, and how do we put it back together? Because that's really the issue.
I read him as being humble.
No, I mean, it was humble, but it took a particular form. I mean, look, and it's also about that topic. So, like, I'm willing to be humble and say, fuck if I know whether it's progressive for the U.S. to annex Greenland. But that's a different kind of thing than I'm not sure I understand Marx.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, you know, Marx is not just some bizarre genius, like, you know, like channeling some voice of the gods. Like, it's just not. Like,
right. You shouldn't be. You know who Osho is? Have you ever heard of Osho?
Oh, yeah.
Marx is not Osho. Okay,
right.
He's not meant to be inscrutable. He's not. Right. He's not one hand clapping. No, I totally agree with you.
Do you know what I mean?
But I was not trying to be mystifying.
No, you were not. Now. You were not. No. But I was just saying that clip just reminded me of why I don't talk about these things. It's not that I can't talk about these things, but the reason that I don't is that I realize, oh, people will never stop debating what Marx meant by value. And that's just it. I don't know what it is about it. I think it's because people ignore the obvious. That's why when I was in my private communication with you, I just said, actually, it's pretty simple, Doug. It's robots in sweatshop. It's the production of unemployment. It's the machine is not a labor-saving device. Like, it's just
but that's merely the level of appearance. There's inherent logic.
Of course. Yes, we can take a bong hit and read Lukács, and it's all phenomenal. It's turtles all the way down. Yes, that is true too. But again, why did Lukács say that? Because he was saying that the proletarian socialist movement was still driven by the misrecognitions of commodity fetishism. And that is a high-level problem.
Right. Well, I agree with him. And I think the value critic people would agree with him.
They would in their own way, but they would kind of concretize it. They would say, oh, well, you know, the Soviet Union and China still did capital accumulation. And it's like, well, but no, we're talking about the movement to overcome capitalism. And I do ultimately think the value critics are, at least the ones I've dealt with, they are kind of like, capitalism will just end. you know, that the
Yeah, well,
contradiction of
I think
value.
that's a debate within that. It's like
It's
on the
just a
one
debate
hand,
within it, but you know what I mean. And I will also say it's not Postonism. The vert critique people hate Postone. And do you know why they hate Postone? They consider him an idealist, not a materialist, which of course is true. And from that perspective, Marx is an idealist, not a materialist, too.
Well, right. I'm gonna say that. Yeah, I always, whenever someone accuses me on the left of being an idealist, I always say, yeah, okay, I am,
Right.
because
But,
everyone,
you know,
because what they're doing with that move is they're reifying
yes,
social relations,
exactly.
and they're acting
Exactly.
as if everything that comes out of this contemporary mode of production and politics, all of it, that's mature reality.
That's
That's just
real.
how things are.
Yeah.
And then now we just have to figure out how we're going to deal with the world as it is.
They treat social relations as an abstraction, and that's why when we say civil society, it drives them up the wall, because they're just like, that's a metaphysical abstraction, that's an idealism. And it's like, no, actually it's real, meaning people are actually doing concrete things to keep wage labor going.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, and people are peeing in bottles when they're delivering for Amazon. You know, they that is not like, that's civil social life. Do you know,
Yeah, there's
that's not.
all sorts of aspects of civil society that are dysfunctional, and if you want to find capitalism, it is concentrated in the state, but it's in civil
It's
society.
there. Yeah, it's it's
right.
in the texture of everyday life. You
Yeah.
know, and so right. And so it's
Yeah,
just, it's so the very critique people, like I said, they to me, they are an unfortunate product of the new left crack up.
I like them still. I don't like I'm on different factions within the work critique people. But what I liked most about them when I first encountered them was that they were certainly not going to say, oh, the problem is the mentality of the American people, or the problem is,
That's true.
you know, they didn't divide the world up into good
I mean, the
nations.
sad thing is, Doug, that basically, you know, will I ever write, you know, like my companion to Marx's Das Kapital? I guess I should. But in the meantime, where do people go? David Harvey and Michael Heinrich. And I think it's unfortunate.
I think that, like, I when I started reading Marx and getting into Marxism, I rejected Harvey, and Heinrich, and certainly Richard Wolff, and then tried to find a,
Yeah, it's a little bit
yeah,
of, that's a little bit of a different problem.
yeah, but he's also how
Yeah,
a lot of people understand Marx
that's
on the
right.
level of political
That's
economy.
right.
And I said no. Andrew Kleinman, Moish Pistone, these are better avenues in to the work critique people. They're going to get you closer to understanding, but also just read Capital. But you're right. I mean, there is a way in which anyone else, some who I was less sympathetic to, started with, I don't know what I'm about to say, and I don't know if I'm going to say it well. I would just go, well, then don't say anything.
Yeah, it's a Marxiana mystification, and it also has there's a funny resonance with academia, because everything is turned into an endless research project in academia in order to justify itself. It's like, you know, it's like the new translation of Marx's Capital. Why was it produced? Because it's like, I don't know, a copyright publishing gimmick, basically. Meaning we don't need another translation of Capital, and we certainly don't need a translation of Capital that's pitched against the history of Marxist politics, which is explicitly what they said, that they want to separate Marxist Capital from Marxist politics.
God, which, yeah, right.
And
Why
I'm
would you
just
do
like,
that?
burn this now, you know? But no, instead it's going to, you know, I don't think it will necessarily become the new standard edition. But why, right? In other words, there might be good reasons for retranslating Marx's Capital, but this is not one, because it's hard to separate the sort of, you know, means as an end in itself kind of character of academia, you know, publish or perish, you know, from the endless mystification of Marx.
Right.
You
And
know?
that certainly does go on. I want to finish off here
Mm-hmm.
with the kind of statement about, we started out with you saying you jumped the shark, maybe, or we kind of hinted at that with this piece. But I think that the reaction
And I
to this
did,
piece,
meaning I cleared the shark.
you
Meaning all
did.
my haters were watching. They were wondering whether Fonzie was going to land and be eaten by the sharks. And guess what, children? No, I made it.
Yeah, but the other meaning of jump the shark is
I know.
Happy Days lost track of what it was.
But did it? I was wondering about that. I was like, couldn't they go to the beach? Or does that mean you've given up the point of the show?
In
other words, there are shows that jump the shark. I definitely have watched shows that have jumped the shark. And it's funny how that example, though, you know, when I went back and watched it, I was like, but did that really? You know, I mean,
look, that would have fit into an Annette Funicello beach party movie, that scene, right? That would have happened in one of those.
Sure.
But those were kind of 60s movies. They were not. Happy Days was supposed to be the 50s, right?
I think my grandparents went to the beach when my parents
were... they did, but they didn't jump the shark when they were at the beach, you know?
They did not. No, I know. And then the other thing that I loved when I went back to watch the clip, Ron Howard driving the speedboat.
Right.
And then he's gone on to be like, you know, an auteur filmmaker.
Right. Well, he's at least a filmmaker. Yeah. No, I just would say, like, what they would accuse you of if they're saying you're jumping the shark is that you've broken the fourth wall. You've left the realm of Marxism. You're now in a whole different genre, and maybe you don't know what
I'm writing for Compact, right? And I don't know what genre I'm in anymore. And you know, that's a risk. I mean, I've published in Compact before.
Yeah.
You know, my signature article at Compact is The End of Millennial Marxism. And so thankfully anyone who reads the Greenland article can click on my author name and find The End of Millennial Marxism, which is in the Marxism and Politics book, an important essay in that book. And I also wrote a review of Ozark, the TV show. You know, and
which is it's a lot of fun, that TV show. I like that.
It is, and I'm proud of that essay as well. And these are interventions in Compact that I've made. They're not just for Compact in the sense of like helping them out, but they're for Compact, meaning they're an intervention by me among their readers and among their writers and editors too.
Right. What we need is for Sublation Magazine to be built up so that you can be writing for Sublation more regularly, because and on the level that Compact, maybe we can eventually even pay you to do so. Because look, why write for Compact instead of Jacobin?
Different audience.
Well, because from my perspective, Jacobin is more constrained.
Oh yeah, they're more censorious, right? In other words, like Jacobin wouldn't publish this article.
No, not in a million years. Yeah.
And you know, why not? In other words, why not initiate a debate on U.S. imperialism?
The reason why Compact is not so constrained is because they're willing to consider Democrats and Republicans.
That's right. That's the main reason.
Right. And Sublation wants to be the publication which considers neither.
That's right.
And there should be a magazine like that.
And that's the unfortunate thing, is that I think that the Compact article on Greenland that I wrote is really much more about, it's not about left-right in our sense. It's about left-right in the capitalist political sense.
Right.
But at the same time, look, I think that they are the realignment journal in their own mind.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that they are considering things at a very fundamental level. So the name of the magazine is The Social Compact. It's the English term for the social contract.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is about, okay, what is the social compact of the United States?
Right.
And surely, I mean, we had an event in New York with Sohrab Ahmari when he
Mm-hmm.
was still, and he's a founding editor. He's no longer there at Compact. And, and I did sort of, challenge him. Like, are you willing to go the distance? Like, do you really uphold the values of America?
Right.
And I think that I pressed him specifically on political liberalism,
Mm-hmm.
right? That would be the weak spot. I brought up Daniel Bell. I said, okay, socialist in economics, right? Conservative in culture,
Mm-hmm.
liberal in politics. And I said, you would seem to conform to those, Sohrab, except for maybe liberal in politics. You might not.
Mm-hmm.
And Doug, we do.
Yeah.
And that's another point that I make in my article, which is to say, why will the US prevail over Russia and China? Because it will,
Mm-hmm.
because it's liberal, meaning the authoritarianism of these states are going to be their undoing.
Right.
They don't have the political resilience to make it. They don't.
Right. And the election of Trump is testifies to
Testament,
that fact.
yeah.
It is a testament to that.
For
And
good or for worse. Like,
right, right.
in other words, like Trump, I mean, is Trump
No,
good?
what's
But he
good
just,
about it is the fact that the established political order did not want this and could not stop this. Not that
yes.
that
Yes.
Trump is so great,
Right.
but just that they're not. There's no unitary party. They can't really do it.
Yep.
And that is for the best. And that's So, and that's something that Sublation should be able to, readers and viewers should be able to recognize.
Be
And I
able to
know it's hard.
understand. I mean, it takes perverse forms. I mean, look, we've been talking about civil social reality versus the state. Well, it might take the form of the billionaires.
Yeah, I know.
It might take the form of the billionaires. Sorry,
You
children.
know that Zuckerberg interview that he did on Joe Rogan, that Rogan had Zuckerberg on. He was wearing a $900,000 watch when he was on that show.
Uh-huh.
So it does seem perverse to me.
It's perverse, but these people have enough power to have independence from the state. And thank God somebody does.
Right.
Now, the Social Democrats are going to scream because they're going to be like, no, that's just the power to exploit and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, let's just talk about politics for a second. Elon Musk is, of course, an exploiter.
Yeah.
He's sort of known, right? Union buster, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the state, and of course people are going to say, oh, well, he owes everything to the state because he's the beneficiary of state contracts. Okay. But he's still a private capitalist in a way that nobody in China is. Meaning there are private capitalists, but guess
he's in China,
He's also in China.
Yeah.
But he's not going to live there because, the knock on the door is more likely there than here.
Oh, absolutely.
It can happen here too, but
look, and to the degree to which he's in China is the degree to which China is liberalizing, maybe, and in some ways, right?
Possibly.
I mean, well, like I had an argument with my father years ago about Starbucks in China, and they're in China, and they're like, oh, all the Starbucks in China are state owned. I was like, no, Starbucks is an American company. Starbucks is owned by the American company.
It's some private-public partnership,
right?
Here and there.
The coffee beans, come from state-owned companies, and the cups are state-owned, and there's all sorts of deals with the state.
That's true here too,
right?
But it's just level of again the formal freedoms that we have, and which are violated all the time. However, they're also not, and you can in fact challenge them. I mean, it doesn't help when you can only challenge them after the fact, after the damage is done. But, they can be challenged in a way that's not possible in Russia or China. It's just not.
Right.
And so, we have to make the best of it. And look, the US still is the dominant capitalist country, and it's going to remain so. So that's another line from my article, which is that there's a gravitational attraction to the United States, meaning all countries want to do business with the United States. Why? Because the United States is actually a more reliable business partner than China and Russia are.
Right.
And so, rule of law. Do you know this? Have you heard this distinction? So in China, they don't have rule of law, they have rule by law. And that's a step of liberalization. So it used to be rule by party, now it's rule by law, meaning that the party uses the law. Right? But it's not the rule of law.
Yeah, which is what we need.
Right. And you're just never going to get that in China.
That's so basic.
It is.
Yeah. And
it is contradicted here.
Yeah.
It is nominally the case. Now, I'll say one other thing about compact, and the nationalism, which is, this is a debate on the right. Is America an idea, or is America a country and a people? America's an idea.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm sorry, again, Marxists are going to pull their hair out, but no. And we have
J.D. Vance would disagree with you.
J.D. Vance would disagree. Absolutely. J.D. Vance and Ramaswamy might agree with me, but hedge it. Right?
But he'd have to agree with you.
He might. Yeah, he might. I guess people are not terribly clear. Tucker Carlson would disagree.
Oh, totally.
And, so it's not to deny that there isn't this nationalism afoot. There is. I don't think that Trump is that, though. I think that Trump would also uphold that the United States is an idea. He's an old-fashioned one. He's a liberal.
A brand.
Yeah, it might be. Well, but it's also, I think that, following Trump for the last 9 years, I think Trump was like, I want to be president. And he wanted to be president for policy reasons. He wanted certain policies. He wanted to renegotiate trade. He wanted to do certain things. He eventually came to the point where he wanted to pull out of the forever wars. These are the priority things for him. And he's a law and order guy too, obviously. And he sees immigration in those terms, in terms of trade and law and order. Okay. But I think that when he was actually looking at the prospect of being president, when it was becoming more and more real, I think that he was like, wait, what is this again? And so I think that Trump has become a student of America in the way that the left ought to.
Yeah.
And in other words, if Donald Trump can discover America,
right,
why can't we?
Right.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.